All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're dissecting a 400-year-old masterpiece, but we're not just looking at it as some dusty piece of classic literature. No, we're looking at it as a gripping, highly calculated psychological thriller. We're going to dive deep into the architecture of betrayal in Shakespeare's Othello. We are going to break down exactly how a human mind is systematically dismantled, using the source text to basically map out the blueprint of one of the most infamous deceptions ever written. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's kick things off with this incredibly chilling statement uttered by our antagonist, Iago. I am not what I am. I mean, wow. This immediately establishes the terrifying gap between appearance and reality. It's a direct, almost blasphemous inversion of the biblical I am that I am, and it firmly sets our baseline. Iago is flat out announcing to us, right from the get-go, that his entire outward persona is a meticulously crafted lie. So, that brings us to the massive central puzzle of this explainer. How does a noble leader actually become a murderer? You gotta wonder, how does a master manipulator systematically dismantle a calm, dignified mind from the inside out? Like, how do you take a universally revered general and turn him into a tragic killer? Well, to understand the fall, we have to look at the foundation of the trap. Which brings us to Section 1, the Mask of Loyalty. Let's look at the status quo in Venice during Act 1 and the underlying threat that sets this whole tragedy in motion. So let's break down Iago's foundation. His actions are built on just pure, unadulterated hatred and deception. He is absolutely furious that Othello promoted Cassio over him, complaining that promotions are all just based on favoritism. But listen to how he operates. He uses these vulgar, highly racist descriptions, calling Othello an old black ram, just to manipulate Desdemona's father. He happily strings along the wealthy Roderigo just to drain his bank account. It's honestly the original blueprint for toxic gaslighting. And this works because Iago fundamentally believes in absolute self-control. He famously claims our bodies are our gardens. He totally rejects fate. He believes for sure that he can plant whatever psychological seeds he wants in the minds of others. Now picture this in contrast. Othello is confronted by an angry, armed mob accusing him of using witchcraft to win Desdemona. And what does he do? He doesn't draw his weapon, he uses poetry. He calmly tells them to keep up their bright swords, saying his past services to the state will easily outtongue any complaints against him. This brilliantly captures Othello's absolute dignity and his total calm under pressure. He's eloquent, he's supremely confident, and he's deeply grounded. And that stands in absolute stark contrast to Iago's chaotic hatred. All right, moving on to Section 2, setting the trap. As the characters relocate to Cyprus in Act 2, the environment shifts from a place of law to a place of isolation, and here, Iago begins laying down his snares. This quote right here is a perfect window into Iago's methodology. He watches a completely innocent gesture of everyday courtly manners, Cassio just politely taking Desdemona by the palm, and he totally twists it. He views it as a predatory spiderweb. See, Iago doesn't need to invent massive, elaborate lies out of thin air. He just needs to slightly, ever so slightly, distort the truth to ensnare his victims. It's incredibly insidious. Let's look at his exact playbook here, because it is purely premeditated. Step 1. He gets Cassio drunk during a celebration, knowing full well the guy cannot handle his alcohol. Step 2. He provokes a massive brawl, which forces Othello to fire his newly promoted officer on the spot. But Step 3 is the stroke of dork genius. Iago plays the comforting best friend, advising a totally disgraced Cassio to ask Othello's wife, Desdemona, to advocate for his job back. This perfectly positions Cassio and Desdemona together, just waiting for Othello to misinterpret what's going on. Now, we all have blind spots when we're desperate, right? Cassio's devastation over his lost honor makes him the absolute perfect unwitting pawn for Iago's manipulation. His desperation completely blinds him to Iago's true nature. He is just so intensely focused on his ruined reputation that he walks right into the trap, repeatedly seeking out Desdemona in private to beg for her help. And that brings us to Section 3, the turning point. As we enter Act 3, the trap snaps shut. This is the exact pivot where the poison truly takes hold of Othello's mind. Talk about a stroke of incredibly cruel irony. Iago actually has the audacity to boldly warn Othello of the very psychological poison he is actively administering to him. While pretending to be this hesitant, super loyal friend, Iago suggests that maybe, just maybe, Desdemona's advocacy for Cassio is a little too passionate. By explicitly warning Othello about jealousy,
the green-eyed monster, he successfully plants the idea that there is actually something to be jealous about in the first place. And then we have the handkerchief, a seemingly innocent, tiny object that is suddenly transformed into the definitive, fatal proof of a lie. It was Othello's first gift to Desdemona, right? A strawberry-spotted handkerchief. She accidentally drops it. Iago's wife, Emilia, picks it up, simply wanting to do something nice for her husband. Then Iago takes it and literally plants it in Cassio's room. For Othello, finding out about this physical object completely bridges the gap between mere suspicion and terrifying certainty. This is the moment he finally says, "Now do I see it's true." In this pivotal moment, that eloquent, highly rational general we met back in Act 1, he's gone. Othello literally bids farewell to his tranquil mind, and we see his deep love entirely replaced by this terrifying thirst for revenge. He kneels down with Iago, vowing bloody retribution, and Iago, he seals the deal with a chilling vow of his own, telling him, "I am your own forever." Now we hit Section 4. The mind unravels. Moving into Act 4, we're essentially watching the real-time destruction of a human psyche. Seriously, just compare the two. We started with this eloquent, confident general, and now we have a fragmented, spiraling man. His syntax completely breaks down. He is so utterly overwhelmed by the false images Iago has planted in his head that he actually collapses in an epileptic fit. The soaring poetic language we saw earlier has been entirely replaced by the stuttering, confused repetition of a totally broken man. The manipulation is now so absolute that Iago is quite literally dictating the method of the impending murder. I mean, Othello originally just asks for poison to do the deed. But Iago, who is clearly reveling in his absolute control and cruelty, insists that Othello must strangle her in the very marriage bed he believes she defiled. It's this intimately violent suggestion, and Othello just readily accepts it. Right before the climax hits, as the women are preparing for bed, Emilia delivers this incredibly poignant feminist speech. While the men in the story are completely lost in these violent illusions, Emilia injects a moment of piercing, rational reality. She points out that women feel, see, and suffer just exactly as men do. It powerfully underscores the tragic, completely discarded innocence of Desdemona right before the end. Which brings us to our final act, Section 5, the tragic resolution. Everything accelerates from here into a breathless sequence of horrific realizations. Look at this rapid, devastating succession of horrors. Iago uses the cover of darkness to hastily tie up his loose ends, violently murdering his own pawn, Roderigo. Meanwhile, Othello acts as the self-appointed executioner of his wife. And the crushing, gut-wrenching weight of this sequence is that the truth actually is finally revealed. Emilia figures it out. She realizes her husband used the handkerchief to destroy them all, but her realization arrives tragically, agonizingly too late to save Desdemona. As he stands over his sleeping wife, Othello's final moments with her are steeped in these powerful, tragic metaphors. Put out the right and then put out the light. He is extinguishing both the physical candle in the room and his innocent wife's life. And the craziest part? He still loves her. He says he will kiss her before he kills her, making the act infinitely more tragic. He truly believes he is enacting cosmic justice, completely blind to the fact that he is just a cog, the final mechanism in Iago's machine. Once the plot is finally exposed, the master manipulator's final act of control is a terrifying silence. When they demand he explained why he caused such absolute ruin, Iago cowardly refuses to give his victims any explanation or closure whatsoever. From this time forth, I never will speak word. He retains his power by permanently withholding the one thing everyone wants, the truth behind his malice. In his final breath, right before taking his own life, Othello desperately attempts to shape his own legacy. He begs to be remembered as a victim of extreme passion, rather than a man who easily succumbed to deception. He refers to himself as one not easily jealous, but being wrought, perplexed in the extreme. Even at the very, very end, he is desperately trying to reclaim that eloquent dignity we saw at the very beginning of our story. So, we just watched a masterclass in psychological manipulation where tiny, almost invisible distortions of truth completely brought down a titan. And it forces us to ask a pretty uncomfortable question. If a noble mind can be dismantled this thoroughly by just a few planted seeds of doubt, how much of our own reality is built entirely on the fragile trust we place in others? Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Keep questioning the information around you, and I'll catch you next time.